doing no type of peace treating. Don't come to the hundreds with none of that. I'm popping.
Snoop was not out. You're on Rollin Crips.
Welcome to Boyz in the Hood TV. Today we tapping in the streets of LA, and we're gonna be talking about the Rollin Crips versus the Hoovers versus the 8 Trays and many other rivals. And we're gonna be discussing different cases, touching on different sets within the hundreds. Now the Rollin Hundreds are a collective of different Crip sets, all under one umbrella from South LA. Sets like 10 Deuce Bud Long Gangster Crips, the original Block Crips, Neighborhood 111, Neighborhood 11-5 Crip, and the Underground Crips, and many other sets. Now the hundreds, the hood stretches all the way from 102nd Street to 120th Street between Century and El Segundo Boulevard. The hundreds mainly beef with the Hoover Criminals, the Denver Langs, the 8 Trays, the Inglewood Families, and many other sets. Now most of these beefs, these stem all the way back to the 70s when most of these gangs were formed. Now the Underground Crips, also known as UGC or UGBC, Underground Block Crips, is one of the main sets we're gonna be talking about in this video that's under the umbrella of the Rollin Hundreds. The Underground Crips main cliques are 103rd, 105th, and 107th. Now, as I stated, the Hoovers are one of the Hundreds' main rivals, and a lot of bodies were lost to this war. On April 2nd, 1995, Underground Crips, including known member John Grissom, robbed a man named Carl Simmons at gunpoint for his black Honda Civic at around midnight. Grissom would then meet up with another Underground Crip named Tawan Randall. Allegedly, Grissom's brother had been jumped by some Hoovers and he was looking for some get back. So Randall would follow behind Grissom in his black Honda, driving a white Oldsmobile. The two men would then drive into Hoover neighborhood. Grissom would spot 2 Hoover members, Daryl Johnson, Siobhan Robinson, both sitting in the car talking outside an apartment complex. Grissom would slowly pull alongside the car and fire 1 shot while driving past. Then he would put it back in reverse and fire another shot. Johnson would be shot and killed, and Robinson was able to flee from the vehicle unharmed. Both Grissom and Randall would flee the scene, and Grissom would take that rifle and hide it at Randall's apartment. But not long after the murder of Johnson, Grissom and Randall would both be identified by witnesses and would be arrested later that year in December. Grissom will be convicted and sentenced to 31 years to life in prison for murder and attempted premeditated murder. Now, just 4 years later, we will see more violence from the war with the Hoovers and the Rollin Hundreds. On August 19, 1999, 2 Underground Crips, Jeffrey Mitchell and Robert Rogers, will make their way near the intersection of 106th Street and Bud Long Avenue. While walking, they spotted a known Hoover member, Peter Drake. Mitchell and Rogers would approach Drake and shoot him over 8 times, including a headshot, killing him instantly. The UG members would immediately flee the scene, and when police arrived, they found Peter Drake lying face up in the middle of the street. On August 23rd, an Underground Crip named Marcus Hartfield was arrested for a burglary. While Marcus was being interrogated, he would tell police that he knew about the murder that happened on 106th Street and Bud Long. Marcus would tell the police that Rogers and Mitchell were responsible for that shooting. Also, another witness would testify that they saw Rogers and Mitchell near the crime scene after the murder. Weeks later in September, both Mitchell and Rogers from the Underground Crips would be arrested on unrelated charges, but both men would eventually be charged with the murder of Hoover member Peter Drake. After the trial, both will be found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. When it comes to beef, like most hoods, the beef just doesn't stop with outside rivals. A lot of times, most gangs have internal beef with active members and sometimes with affiliated members that they grew up with. On October 4th, 2001, 2 Underground Crips, William Jackson and Kareem Shaw, spotted a man named Danny Trahan, who Jackson knew from the neighborhood. Danny was driving around on 104th and Lenox. Jackson and Kareem would then block Danny's car in from the front and back like a sandwich, so he couldn't escape neither way. Moments later, Jackson and Shaw both would hop out of the car, and Jackson would say, "What's up now?" It's unclear what was going on, but it obviously was an issue between the two. Jackson would then point a pistol at Danny's head, and immediately Danny would knock the gun away, and Danny would begin fighting with both Jackson and Shaw. Somehow Danny manages to break free and run, and Shaw would shoot multiple times at Danny. While running, Danny would then be blocked in by another vehicle driven by a woman. The woman and man would hop out of the vehicle and start attacking Danny. And eventually, Shaw and Jackson joined in and they started jumping him. They attempted to throw Danny in the back of the trunk, but when that didn't work, Jackson instructed one of the members to shoot him, but as they tried to pull the trigger, the gun would jam. After this failed attempt, the underground Crips let Danny go, and they ended up jumping back into the vehicle and driving away. Later on, Danny would ID both Shaw and Jackson, who would be arrested just 2 days later. And at the end of the trial, Shaw and Jackson will be sentenced to life in prison for the attempted murder of Danny Trahan. On September 1st, 2005, Black Crip Makitha Christian would approach a group of dudes playing dice outside of a Johnny Stringer's home on 103rd Street. In attendance was Johnny Stringer, Deron Marshall, Pierre, John Kennedy, and many others. Christian would ask if anybody on the block was strapped after he noticed a ton of money laying on the ground. According to witnesses, it was about $2,000 in cash. Stringer then will reply, "Nah, ain't no need to because everybody cool because this is my house." Christian would then leave the scene as the men continued to play dice. Christian would drive up 105th Street and pick up an underground Crip named Davion McDowell. Sometime later, Christian would come back with McDowell in the car with him, and he would then hand the gun to McDowell. McDowell would then hop out the car with a bandana wrapped around his face and run up on the men playing dice and would yell, "Break yourself," demanding them to hand over all of the money. Immediately, everybody started running, and McDowell would open fire in a spraying-like motion, going from left to right, shooting. Pierre and Kennedy were both shot, and Stringer was hit 3 times with one fatal shot that pierced both his heart and lungs, killing him instantly at the scene. McDowell would hop back in the car with Christian, and they would flee the scene. Months later, McDowell and Christian were identified, and they would be arrested and eventually convicted of the murder and premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison. Now, the Rollin Hunters war with the Hoovers will continue to shed blood 4 years later. On February 28th, 2009, Dante Nolan, an underground Crip, and Gregory Davis were coming from a party on 107th Street near Normandy Avenue. As Davis and Nolan were about to get in the car, a known 11 Deuce Hoover member, Demago Hall, aka Tiny Snaps, stood across the street. Suddenly he yelled, "Fuck ugly girls," and opened fire. Davis and Nolan both ran, and Davis was hit 3 times in the abdomen, then hit 5 more times in the back, wrist, thumb, and foot as he tried to hide. Nolan tried to climb a nearby fence, but he was hit multiple times with one bullet, piercing his liver and hitting his lung, killing him at the scene. Months later, Hall would be picked up in a gang injunction. After having a recorded conversation with another Hoover member who was an informant, he would admit to the shooting and eventually be charged with the murder. Hall would be found guilty of the murder and premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison. Now, the Rollin Hunters have no shortage of beef in the city. As I mentioned, they beef with the Hoovers, but they also beef with the Blood and Pyru sets. One in particular is the Avenue Pyru Gang, or APG. On March 4th, 2011, on 108th Street and Western Avenue, a woman named Ernisha T and her sister-in-law were parked near a laundromat. While getting out of the car, Ernisha called to her son, a known neighborhood affiliate, Cameron, who's at a nearby apartment complex, to come down and help her out. When Cameron got to the car, he tried to help his mother pull out the dog cage that was in the back seat, when suddenly an Avenue Pyru member named Aaron Mitchell approached out of nowhere. He immediately pressed Cameron and asked, "Where you from? Neighborhood 90?" But Cameron didn't respond. But his mother did. She said, "We don't bang, we just family over here." And Mitchell would then respond, "Fuck that," and pulled out a gun and started shooting. Cameron was shot in the mouth and chest, but he was able to run. Mitchell would then shoot Ernisha in her foot as she tried to flee the scene. Cameron and his mother would both survive their wounds. But about 6 months later, they would both identify Pyru member Mitchell in a photograph lineup, and he would be arrested and charged. After the trial was over, Aaron Mitchell was charged with premeditated attempted murder, assault with a firearm, and sentenced to 31 years to life in prison. Just 1 year later, the beef with the Hoovers would heat up. On July 4th, 2012, at around 10:20 p.m., 10 Deuce Budlong Crips, Michael Stanton, aka Crypto, Brian Session, aka Baby Sticks, and an underground Crip named Jasper Jones will be driving along 97th Street between Normandy and Budlong, where the Hoovers were having a party at. They would then park the Jeep up the block and slowly make their way down the block towards the party. A group of people were standing outside, including 3 teenagers between the age of 12 and 14, and a man believed to be a Hoover affiliate, Freddie Pickett. Moments later, Stanton and Sessions and Jones would make their way across 97th Street and start shooting. Immediately, the crowd of people dispersed, and one of the teens named RR was shot, and also Freddie Hoover was shot in the leg, but a 14-year-old named Unique Russell would be shot in her chest and she would die at the scene. Stanton, Session, and Jones would immediately flee the scene, hopping back into the Jeep and driving off. Just weeks later, Stanton would admit in a text message to a female that he was responsible for the 4th of July shooting.
Supervisor Mark Ridley Thomas. July 4th of this year, Unique Russell, a 14-year-old female, was struck down by gunfire and apparent gang violence while celebrating the 4th of July with family and friends in the neighborhood, front yard of the house. Michael Staten, who's a male black, 19, a self-admitted and documented local gang member, was arrested on 1 count of murder, 2 counts of attempt murder of 2 other victims who were struck by gunfire that night. He is currently being held on $4 million bail.
Jasper will be found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 24 years in prison, and Stanton will be found guilty of murder and sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. Now, just 2 years later, on November 8th, 2014, at about 1 a.m., an underground Crip named Kevin Scott, a.k.a. Casper, was at a strip club in downtown L.A. He spotted another Rollin Hunters member by the name of Douglas Baskins and his girlfriend, Tamila Hempfield. Casper was aware that Douglas had vouched for a man by the name of E-Mac, who the hood believed had paperwork on him, a.k.a. snitching. And the word was going around that Douglas continued to vouch for him even after the snitch allegations came out. So Casper took it upon himself that he was going to handle the situation. Moments later, Casper would be seen leaving the club, waiting by his Range Rover for Baskin and his girlfriend to come out the strip club. At around 1:45 a.m., Douglas and Tamila would come out and get into the vehicle and drive away. Casper would then follow right behind them. As they hit Almeida and 14th Street, Casper would pull on side and start shooting at Douglas' car. 7 shots would go through the window, and Douglas was hit in his hand, but Tamila would be shot in her back and eventually die from her wounds. Now, there was surveillance footage showing Casper moments before the shooting, which would lead Scott, a.k.a. Casper, to being arrested for the shooting. With the combination of the camera footage, although it did not show the actual shooting itself, it placed Scott at the scene. That, along with testimonies, the prosecution had all the evidence they needed, and Casper would be convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. The war with the Hoovers was a never-ending beef, and it was spilled into 2015. On March 12, 2015, underground Crips Cleo Steele, Bill Shepard, Johnny Johnson, and Quincy Jefferson were at a house on 105th Street and Normandy Avenue. An underground Crip named Infant stated that he had saw a Hoover member, Cleveland Ross, a.k.a. Red Bang, at a nearby AutoZone on Century Boulevard and Hoover Street. The group then got into 3 different vehicles to go to AutoZone: a Chrysler 300, a BMW, and a Buick. After arriving, all 3 cars were parked. After spotting Ross near his vehicle, underground Crip named Cleo will pull out a .357 revolver and start shooting. Cleo let off about 7 shots, hitting and killing Ross, who would die at the scene. Surveillance footage would capture the entire shooting on camera. Also, witnesses saw the events take place. This shooting will have dire consequences because just weeks later, on March 31st, 2015, underground Crip named Tyrone Golden was on 102nd Street in Normandy when 2 Hoover members, Walter Jones, a.k.a. No Good, and James William, a.k.a. Ratneck, rode up on him in a white van. At around 8:20 a.m., they pulled near Goldman, and Jones would ask him where he was from, and Golden replied, 10 Deuce Bud Long. And immediately, Jones hopped out and shot Golden multiple times, including a headshot. Golden would die at the scene. Eventually, Jones and Williams would be arrested for the murder, sentenced to life in prison. Now, months later after this shooting, Cleo Steele from Underground Crips will be back on the hunt again. On June 10th, 2015, Cleo Steele and Randall will be riding down 88th Street near Monarch Liquor Store. Parked outside was a Dodge Dart, which had known Hoover member Kevin Carr, Michael Baptist, Larrell Williams, and an A-Tray Crip by the name of Michael Washington, who was outside of the car. The Underground Crips would block in the Dodge Dart, and Cleo Steele would hop out of the car and start dumping with a 20 clip. Steele let off multiple shots, hitting Carr, Baptist, and hitting Washington multiple times, who would die at the scene. Also nearby, a woman was sitting while reading a book, and she was shot in her hip. Eventually, the UG Crips all would be arrested. Cleo Steele would be not only charged for the murder and attempted murder on June 10th, but he was also charged for the murder of Hoover member Ross back in March. After the trial, Cleo Steele would be eventually sentenced for 2 counts of murder and multiple counts of attempted murder, and he would get life without parole in prison. That same year, on July 17, 2015, known Block Crip member Kenneth Peavy, aka KP, was standing on 109th Street where he would be shot and killed, allegedly by Hoover members.
Are all we have to show you of him in the prime of his life. He was murdered on 109th Street east of Hobart Avenue in South Los Angeles. Kenneth and a friend stopped here to make plans to meet someone. A security camera was rolling at 12:45 in the morning on Friday, July 17th, 2015, when a car rolled down the street with someone inside shooting at Kenneth Peavy.
Comes into view and then out of view of the camera right here. And then following him, we see the first suspect, gun in hand, chasing him as well. Once the suspect is just out of view of the camera, you'll see some muzzle flashes from the gun. And then that suspect takes off running back down the driveway this way. The second suspect runs in as well. You actually see him holding the gun and firing 2 rounds. And then he also runs back down this driveway.
He's the left-handed shooter. These are freeze frames of the 2 men. Investigators believe more men and at least one more car were on 109th Street when Peavy was shot.
Now, this hate with the Hoovers runs deep, so deep that it will spill into the 2020s. On May 6, 2020, known Hoover member named Breon Durr was standing outside on Hoover Street when a Rollin Hunters member would roll up and shoot him multiple times, and he would die at the scene. Now, this murder would trigger immediate get back. That same day, well-known Rollin Hunted Block Crip member Charles Lewis, aka Bone, was out near 111th Street in Westmont when the Hoovers would slide through and open fire, killing Bone at the scene. Now, even with all this beef with the Hoovers and the 8 Trays and all the other rivals, it's well known that the Rollin Hunteds have a lot of internal beef that's been going on for a while. And on February 1st, 2021, known Block Crip member named Lavelle Deshaun Gilchrist, aka Lil Spy, was shot and killed on Hope Street in downtown LA. Now, allegedly, I repeat, allegedly a member of neighborhood 111 was responsible for this murder. Also, 111 is allegedly responsible for the murder of former Block Crip Craig Batiste, aka Big, whose son is Flame Gang Uzi, on September 8th, 2021.
A former gang member who became a beloved community leader and peacemaker is dead, killed in a shooting near his home Wednesday morning. Haley Winslow has the latest from South LA.
And he would help any kids. You can't find many people do that these days.
Everyone in the South LA community seemed to know him, and they all said the same thing. Craig Batiste couldn't have been a better person. Called big for the size of his heart, the 54-year-old was having a cup of coffee with his neighbor near 111th and Hobart at about 8:30 Wednesday morning. Investigators say someone in a dark sedan opened fire. Big tried to run but was trapped by this fence. Neighbors call the former gang member the peacemaker. Big turned his life around more than 20 years ago and spent it doing everything for everyone else. He had 4 kids, but was a father to everybody, walking troubled kids to and from school safely and helping them get their lives back on track. Neighbors heard about 15 gunshots. A few of them hit this house next door. You can see the bullet holes in the wall. This is actually little kid's bedroom, and they were home at the time, but thankfully, they weren't hurt.
I want to thank y'all for tapping into this video. I hope y'all enjoyed it, and I'll see y'all next time.